We've been asked about trance and hypnosis and drugs and how they relate and how we can induce trance in different ways, which is really another subject, topic in a sense, to go into more detail about trance, different kinds of trance, how to develop the trance and applications and so on. But firstly, very quickly, trance is a natural, necessary, healthy phenomenon. It's been known for thousands of years that the human mind can go into different levels of consciousness, and many of these trances have been used for creativity, inspiration, meditation, religious ecstasy, and so on. In the Western world, the trance that's most studied is the hypnotic trance. It's been the subject of investigation, looking at brain waves, different parts of the brain that are activated in trance. And so we do know quite a bit about it compared to, say, a few hundred years ago, but there's a lot we still have yet to understand. Now, drugs can have effects on the brain that produce trance-like states. Hypnosis can be used in conjunction with drugs, and in fact, towards the latter half of the 19th century, it was quite common to experiment with deepening the trance through drugs or inducing the state through drugs. And there's a long history of the use of psychedelics in different cultures. Different plants have been used, different compounds have been produced, even different gases that are occurring in nature from the ground, for example, fissures in the earth, and certain kinds of gases have been used to induce trance-like states. And of course there's active and passive trances. There's trances through dancing, through music, through different ways of influencing the nervous system. But the mind producing its own trance is really what we're most focused on in Hypnotherapy Training International. But drugs can be used as part of therapy, and this fashion has come and gone. Actually, the late 19th century, people were experimenting even back then, as influences from Mexico of various plants, peyote, and from which we have mescaline and the development of psilocybin. And these drugs are around, and of course the synthetic development of LSD and its therapeutic and some of the nefarious uses by people in authority in the past. So there are positives and negatives, and if we look at the use of trance through drugs, it's got to be observed and understood that they can only have their effects because there are receptors in the brain that recognize that drug, that compound, its molecular structure, a bit like a lock and a key and a lock. And as that lock exists within us, we have our own natural indwelling keys. We have our own chemicals. Many of the drugs operate through the serotonin receptor subtypes and act at the agonist level usually, and it's complicated, but nevertheless, these compounds will induce changes in consciousness, and that has been used therapeutically in conjunction with suggestion or opening up the subconscious mind. And the therapeutic use, as I say, of drugs was even in the late 19th century, and then as the 20th century came along, it began to fade out of fashion, and then in the early 1920s there was another upsurge. And then post-war, there was again a fashion for using chemicals for therapeutic purposes. In the 60s, of course, it became famous, even infamous, in the hippie generation, where the whole philosophy of using drugs for consciousness expansion reached a very high level, even to very extreme levels. In the 80s, 90s, and now in the mid-20s, certainly middle of the 2020 decade, there's been an increasing use of these compounds. Now, in terms of side effects, problems, difficulties with them, we always have to take that into account. Individual responses that may not easily be controlled when you're taking an external chemical. And then, of course, people sometimes are using street versions of these compounds, which can be contaminated, and there's problems of dosage, and it can be a very uncontrolled and sometimes dangerous experiment. The great value of using the mind itself is that we're using our natural internal chemicals, which are exactly designed to fit these receptors in our brain. And so we've all experienced natural everyday trance. people being relaxed to a degree will often take them in the very first levels of trance. And people obviously go to sleep, people have meditational states, daydreaming states, and in that directed trance we call hypnosis, where the power of suggestion is used to induce trance and to develop the trance, and the trance affects suggestion. They are related and yet different phenomena, and I'm not going to go into trance in depth here. That's another video, and at some point I'll go through suggestion as well, touching on some main points. Now, if we can use trance, we can use it in when we learn enough about it, and I hope you will take opportunity to learn from us about trance, which is, even with many therapists, not very well understood or even denied by some therapists who say the trance really doesn't exist. And history, in my opinion, shows very differently, that most creative people, in describing their states of creativity, for example, Beethoven, Mozart, wrote about how it felt when they were composing, how it was like a dreamlike state, and how ideas came to them. Einstein, the scientist, many famous discoveries were developed through states that we technically, scientifically call hypnoidal. There's a hypnagogic, hypnopompic state, that's going to sleep, coming out of sleep, and the sleep state, of course, where dreams occur. Whether we call that a trance or whether we call it just a different state of consciousness, well, we can debate it, and we can look at brain waves and parts of the brain involved in it. The trance, in my view, is a very real phenomenon which can be used for great healing, great creative development in an individual. And we've used it constantly in medical settings to help people with problems, in using surgery, so they go through surgery smiling without anesthetics because they have problems with the anesthetics. And so it's real, in my opinion, and we can develop to very, very high levels. So I hope you will take the opportunity to come on a course, and in a few weeks' time we have an online course where you can begin to learn about trance, to develop it. And if you develop it properly, you'll find it's of great benefit for your body, your mind, your outcomes and goals in life. And if you wish, you can use it to help others greatly. So, hypnosis for trance, drugs for trance, they can be used together. And in the case of hypnosis, we are avoiding some of the detrimental, potential negative effects of the drug use. Thank you very much for listening and watching.